Be warned, this video has me talking a lot and very fast. Hey guys, welcome to an Ethix educational video. Today we're going to be talking about 4S and 6S, kind of a follow-up to my previous video that I made a couple weeks ago. I'll put a link in the description right here. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and check that out now so that you'll know what I'm talking about a little more in detail. So we're going to talk about the differences between my 4S rig that I've been flying for the last 2.5, 3 years and the 6S rig, and the different combinations of things that I have found that work on the 4S rig that, you know, work or don't work on the 6S rig. We're also going to talk about batteries. We're going to talk about 4S 1300s, 1500s, and the new 6S 1100, and these are milliamps. That's 1100 milliamps. And also, there again, like people were talking about saying, hey, you should have done a 1500 instead of the 1300 because a 1500 flies just as long. I'll get into that, why I don't run a 1500 in this video, why I particularly liked the 1300. And then we'll also talk about motors, because there has been some confusion about motors and the different motors and the colors and why you would run one on 6S and why you can't just put a black bell on the white motor and make it run on 6S, and all of that jazz. And then, yeah, the other thing at the very end, other than the KISS PIDs, everybody's going to freak out about those. I almost forgot. We're going to talk about 6S PIDs, and we're going to talk about 4S PIDs and the difference between the two. I'll bring them up on the screen when we talk about them. I have them on my computer right here. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is some new Ethix products that we have coming out, or that are already out on our store at ethixltd.com. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to be talking really fast, so if you're not used to me talking very fast or talking about a lot of numbers and a lot of information, then you're probably going to want to slow the video down. If you're like me and you want to speed the video up and get through it as quickly as possible and get all that stuff going, then try it. Put it at 1.5 and see what happens. So anyways, we're going to talk about first 4S versus 6S as far as the rigs are concerned, and why I prefer a 1300 versus a 1500. So let me go ahead and just give you the basic weights of my 4S rig versus my 6S rig. This is with a Session 5 GoPro and a 1300 4S. I do have another camera set up here, and that's going to be focused on this particular scale, which is, you know, could be a drug scale, could be whatever. I use it to weigh quads. So we're going to put this 4S rig on here, and it comes out to right around 585 typically. Right now it's saying 583, but give me 585. Come on. 585. There we go. 585 grams. And again, that is a 4S setup, and that's the typical rig that I've been flying. All of the parts are listed in the description below for the last 2 years or so. So that is a 1300 4S Thunder Power, and that is a Hero or a Session 5 GoPro. Again, this one, not the new HERO6, which is big fatty. So let's go ahead and take that off the scale and just compare it to a 6S rig. So again, the only differences between these two are this has a 1700 kV stator, and it has a 6S 1100 milliamp pack on it. Thunder Power 6S 1100 milliamp pack, and it does have capacitors, because if you're running individual ESCs, you do need to run capacitors on them because of voltage spikes going back and forth between the flight controller and the ESCs, and your PDB. So this is 612 grams. So you're talking about 585 versus 612. It's about 27 grams or so. That's not a huge difference, especially considering that you're talking about gaining a little bit more power, and you're also gaining almost twice the flight time. So, you know, 27 grams is pretty, you know, affordable when you're talking about gaining that kind of power and that kind of flight time. The one huge difference is 611, 612 is actually a little bit overweight as far as I'm concerned. When I was flying 4S the last 2 to 3 years, even in the beginning when I started flying quads, I noticed that there was a sweet spot as far as you get a little bit heavy and it starts to break more. You get a little bit light, and it doesn't necessarily have the huckability or the throwability that I'm used to, and that's what I look for when I'm making a quad as far as like my formula. I want it to weigh a certain amount so that I can do the things that I do, and that weight, especially with a lower camera angle, really helps you do things like knife edge through trees and being able to flip and float over things and have momentum. All of that is coming down to your weight. If you have really high camera angle and a lot of power, you can just float forever because you're going to fly, you know, based on your camera angle, and you can stay parallel in the air. When you have low camera angle, it's harder to do that. So when you're talking about a 4S rig, a 1300, the sweet spot was what put me in the sweet spot. The sweet spot is between 550 grams and 600 grams. Anything over that, things start to break a little bit easier. Anything under that, and it's a little bit too light. So that is always the number that I try to go for, between 550 and 600. Obviously, you can see my 4S rig is at 585, so it's within those 2 points and well within the sweet spot. You notice that the 6S rig is actually a little bit out of that, so it's, you know, a little more prone to breaking. And not saying that I'm not working on something to make it lighter, but you know, as it is right now with just putting 6S onto my PDB that wasn't designed to do the PDB was designed to do that, but I have a 4-in-1 here that it wasn't designed to do. And you know, whatever. I'm just trying to save weight, and there are other things that I'll talk about sporadically through this video, like the KISS 4-in-1 25 amp. But for now, we'll just talk about this setup, and it's at 612. It's a little bit heavy, but you don't notice it on 6S because you have that much more power and there's that much more torque in the response. So again, differences between those two, and I will address the comments that we're talking about. You should have compared a 1500 4S versus the 1100 6S, because that would have given you more of a real, like, you know, apples to apples instead of apples and oranges, because this has bigger capacity and this has more voltage, and you should do this. Well, let me tell you something. If you put more capacity, you're just adding weight. You're not adding any power per se. If the battery can't handle it, say you have a 1300 and it's a low C rating, yeah, if you have a bigger battery, that adds power because it has more of a capacity to be able to handle that kind of amp draw. But in my particular scenario, the 1300s that I'm flying are well capable of handling the amount of amp draw that I'm drawing. So when you're talking about adding a 1500, let's go ahead and weigh this thing versus a 1300. And again, these are the kind of last generation of Thunder Power, so they have this little negative tabs and the positive tabs on opposite sides, so it kind of looks like an ellipse or an oval, and these are the rectangular ones, so these are even older, and this is kind of a, you know, 6-month-old design. They've actually had a newer one that's lighter than this, but I'll give you a baseline as far as batteries are concerned. We're talking about 156 grams for the 4S 1300, and we're talking about 183 or 182.7 grams for the 1500. The other reason I don't like 1500s is because when you put them on your quad, they stick off a little bit because they're a little bit taller. And also the fact is that you're adding that much weight, and it's harder to make the CG accurate. And what I'm talking about when I say CG, that stands for center of gravity. Most people don't know this. And you know, I may just blow some people's minds, but you need to make sure this thing has good CG. When I'm talking about CG, I'm talking about taking your fingers, taking it right over the flight controller or the center of the quad. Sometimes the flight controller is not in the center, and you want to make sure it's neutral. If it sits like this, it's a little nose heavy, you need to shift the battery back or something. If it's like this, it's ass heavy, you need to shift the battery forward or shift the GoPro farther forward or whatever. You need to add some weight to make it feel neutral. When I run a 1500 and add that extra amount of weight, which whatever, 150 to 180, it's like 30 grams or so, you're talking about being able to shift 30 grams farther forward, and you can only move it so much because the camera's right here. So that was my main issue, was you're adding weight to the quad, which takes the power to weight ratio and the agility of the quad away. Not necessarily away, but it reduces it. And also you're adding a little bit kind of a bulkier of a battery, doesn't allow you to get the CG as accurate, or even sometimes not at all depending on the battery. That's a light 1500. Some of them are up in the 200 gram range. So, you know, on my particular setup, a 1300 was always conducive for the agility and the weight, everything that I wanted. So that is why I never ran a 1500. That's why I didn't compare a 1500. I want a certain weight, and obviously I'm over slightly, but that's because this rig is, you know, not designed for 6S, and I'm just putting 6S on and making it work so I can, you know, refine stuff in the future and you get back down to my 550 to 600 sweet spot. So just let me compare the 6S 1300 or 6S 1100 Thunder Power right here. We'll just go ahead and throw that on the scale so you can kind of get a general idea of what the weight is. This says 178.8 grams. There's about 179 grams. So it is actually lighter than the 4S 1500, and you're gaining 8.4 more volts. So these are 16.8 volts fully charged. These are 22.5 volts fully charged. With that extra voltage, you're going to gain a lot more efficiency overall because the motors are not having to work as hard because they have more torque. The more voltage equals usually more torque and more efficiency, cooler temperatures, as you've seen. If you've seen my video from last week, again, check it out if you haven't. The cooler temperatures of the motors coming down, the ESCs didn't have to work as hard. The amp draw overall, even at higher volt or higher throttle positions and at cruising, was sometimes almost half. I think high amp draw on a 4S was like 95 amps, and then full throttle on a 6S was like 69 amps or something like that. So you're talking about a huge amp difference. You're also talking about a lot of temperature difference too. So, and you're also talking about being able to fly longer, and that's the huge benefit of running 6S. So Let's get away from batteries and start getting in other things, or we're going to be stuck on that forever. CG, all up weight, you got to keep those things in mind. If you ever see AUW, that stands for all up weight. That means as if the quad were flying in the air, and that's kind of the weight that you're talking about. So this particular quad had a 585 all up weight as if I was flying it, and this particular quad, which is the 6S quad, had a 612 gram all up weight. So again, a little bit over my sweet spot of 550 to 600, but you know, it's well within working range. Now, let's talk about cameras, and then we'll talk about motors and PIDs, because everyone has talked about, you know, they hate that this thing's gone away. This is the Session 5. This is like the best camera that was ever invented for FPV, because it just happens to fit perfectly on FPV rigs, and it looks super dope and does 60 FPS and 1080 at super view, and it does 2.7 at super view. Super view is like our bread and butter. Like everybody always flies super view on FPV because it looks so much better, because you're distorted. It makes everything look faster and you can see so much more. So this camera was amazing, super durable and waterproof versus the HERO4, which what we were flying beforehand. Now, then this camera came out, which is the HERO6. They came out with the HERO5 and that kind of sucked. And then the HERO6 came out. The HERO6 is extremely capable. It has all kinds of frame rates, everything that you would ever want: 4K 60, 2.7, 120 in wide, and then 1080, 240, which is extreme slow-mo if you really want to slow something down. Now, the one downside of this thing is the weight. So let me go ahead and weigh these things for you. We're going to compare a Session 5 versus a HERO6. Now, Session 5s are pretty light. This is 73 grams. That's actually lighter than a HERO4, but it is completely waterproof without, and you don't have to really protect these things. Now the HERO6 is 118 grams, which is pretty beefy. So you're going from 73 to 118. So that's almost 40 something grams or so. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about adding 40 grams to the nose of your aircraft and also making this big wall of a thing try to stay up there, not only does it add weight to the quad, and if you're talking about a 4S, if you ran a 1500 to balance this thing out because you couldn't get a 1300 far enough back, you're talking about adding 40 grams there, and you're talking about adding 20 something grams there. So you're at like 67 grams or 80 grams or 67, 70 grams added to the quad, and you're not gaining any power. This doesn't help with power. This actually weighs the quad down and makes it less agile. So that's kind of why when I'm talking about going from 4S to 6S, you know, yeah, you can get more power on a 4S setup, but usually requires a bigger battery. It'll handle the more amp draw. With 6S, you can still kind of remain light and have the more power because you're gaining efficiency by going to a higher voltage. So with that being said, this is the camera that everybody's eventually going to have to switch to unless something else comes out that can give this thing a run for its money. So, you know, everyone's going to fly these, including myself, until they're all gone or all broken, and then eventually we're going to have to switch to this. I still use this for shoots, and I've flown it on 4S and it works great, but if flight times are reduced, and it just overall feels sluggish compared to the Session. But the image quality is so much better. So that is kind of really conducive for 6S because you are adding that much more power. Again, let's get off cameras and we're gonna get to, I do have something special for you at the end for the HERO6 that maybe help protect it. But let's get to motors and then we'll talk about PIDs, because I know a lot of people have asked about motors. They're like, yo, I got the black bell, because the bells are sold separately. These are black bells and these are white bells. They aren't just different colors. They do have differences to them, and I'll explain that now, so it hopefully will clear up some confusion. So this is the newer motor. This is the actual, it's called the Stout. This is designed for 6S, not because it's black, but I will explain to you here in a second. This is a 4S motor. This is the Silk. Why I went with a Silk versus a Stout? Just to kind of make a long story short, on the V1, I wanted to have interchangeable bells. One had an N48 magnet, one had an N52 magnet. The differences between those magnets is the N48 is a little bit smoother, a little bit weaker, and doesn't have as many mid-throttle oscillations on particularly a 4S rig. On my setup in particular, with the resonant frequency of that frame, this motor, which is a 2340 something kV with an N52 magnet, which is the original motor that I tested when I went to Drone Nationals 2016, not only killed batteries because it was too powerful, but it also was very vibrating, because the more powerful of a magnet you put in the motor, the more cogging it has and the more usually mid-throttle oscillations that are resulting from that cogginess. So anyways, Silk, I came out with the V1. I wanted interchangeable things, but because of the C-clip and me not being able to find a malleable one, and me just having to go and say, fuck it, I'm tired of all these C-clips having problems. Even in the beta stage before they even came out and had C-clip problems, I told them just to put the most heavy-duty C-clip they can on there, and
eventually
it was too heavy-duty, and that's why the whole C-clip issue happened. So we decided to wait to have interchangeable bells on the V2. So again, V1, V2, and this bell. these are completely interchangeable. The difference in N48 magnets, N52 magnets. What does this bell on this motor do? 2300 kV motor with N52 magnets, you put it on there, actually gives you 10% more power at the same efficiency. So you do draw 10% more amps, but you do get 10% more power, and it feels a little bit bitier because you are running a stronger magnet and it responds a little bit quicker. Now, with that being said, this is a 4S motor. You can think of it as the white base is a 4S motor, the 2300 kV. Now, the difference between the two motors is this is the stout motor. This is a stout bell. These are both N52 magnets. However, the base, as you will notice, is a different color. It's black. Black base is a 1700 kV. It's got more windings, more copper on the actual stator itself, which actually reduces the RPM and allows it to be able to be run on 6S. So you want a lower kV when you go 6S, higher voltage, lower kV, lower voltage, higher kV. So 2300 kV, 1700 kV. Again, these bells are interchangeable. If you want to try the silk bell on the stout motor, again, 1700 kV with the white bell completely works. All of this stuff is interchangeable, even with the V1 motors. You can take off V1 bells and put V2 bells. You can put V1 bells on V2 motors. Everything fits. And I just kind of wanted to clear that up because I've had a lot of questions about running these white things, the white bases, on 6S, and I'm sorry, but that's going to be extremely overpowered, and you're probably going to end up burning up the motors because they're way too high of a kV for that high of a voltage. So hopefully that cleared up some misconceptions about these particular motors. The black is again 1700 kV and the white is 2300 kV. If you want to swap bells, you can do that. I ended up liking the N52 magnets on the 1700 kV, so we just decided to put N52s, have a stout bell. It all worked out pretty serendipitously, actually. So, and also you get these little things on there. I don't know if people have seen these, but they're like little PC polycarbonate pants that you can add. So in California, I didn't have any issues with any kind of dirt getting under the motor, so I ran pantsless to save a tiny bit of weight, like a fraction of a gram. If you want, you can run these, which protect the motor. They're all keyed and they fit on all of the motors. And then you have the lower profile ones that are just essentially a motor base that don't have any kind of protection around them, but they do protect, especially on the East Coast. When you crash in dirt doesn't get up into the bottom of the motor. So again, let's get away from motors. I've talked about that quite a bit, and I'm talking really fast. I'm not on crack. I'm just excited about this stuff. So let's talk about, I think my computer died. Anyways, I will just talk about 6S PIDs. So I'm going to pop those up on the screen now. 4S PIDs are going to be on the left side of the screen. 6S PIDs are going to be on the right side of the screen. You'll notice that the 6S PIDs are slightly lower, especially the Ps. You'll notice the yaw P is extremely low versus the 4S P. Now, the 4S, I've noticed that you've always had to crank the P up in particular, and I, in my case, to get the kind of feel that I want, which is a very crisp feel. On KISS, it is very organic feeling, but I do kind of want a more crisp. It's a weird thing. It's like loose and crisp at the same time. With 6S, it seems even more crisp because you're running a higher voltage, you have more torque available, and because of the added torque, you actually have to run a lower yaw P or you get crazy yaw jump. Now, there was a few years ago, there was actually a command line code in the GUI of Clean Flight or Beta Flight or something where you could prevent yaw jump. It's like yaw jump prevention or something like that. And that was basically to stop when you did a yaw line of sight or a yaw in the FPV and the quad would jump. And that's because your yaw P is too high, but you can't run a low yaw P on 4S because it feels spongy. So that's, I had to lower yaw P so much on 6S to kind of get it to fly the way that I wanted to and not jump. So you'll notice that the yaw P is very low. Yaw I has decreased. TPA has gone up pretty, not substantially, but it has gone up because you are dealing with a little bit more RPM, a little bit more power. I'll talk to you about RPM and volts and stuff like that in a second, so you can really see the difference between the power. And there is a bit more power on 6S. And also, if you look at the rates have gone up slightly. And the reason that is because I just have a natural feel about, when I throw the stick a certain way, I want it to do a certain thing. And that feel, what it was on 4S, wasn't actually exactly the same on 6S, so I adjusted it to feel exactly the same. And it is a little bit tighter, so that when you add a little bit more roll rate to 6S, it seems a little bit more controllable. So that's why I did what I did. The last thing we'll talk about on motors and PIDs and stuff, and we'll talk about voltage and whatnot just very quickly, and then we will talk about Ethix products and we'll be done. So let's go ahead and talk about RPM versus volt, and we'll talk about kV so that you can kind of get an idea of what you're talking about. So kV of a motor, kV doesn't stand for kilovolt. It actually stands for RPM per volt. So if you're talking about a 4S motor, most 4S motors are 2300 kV. So how you calculate this in theory is you take 4S, a fully charged 4S is 16.8 volts, and you multiply it by 2300 or whatever kV motor you're trying to run. Now, what that comes to be in this particular instance with a 4S and a 2300 kV is right around 40,000 theoretical RPM. And that is unloaded RPM. That's not with a prop on it. That's just to be spun the motor up with a fully charged 16.8 volts, and it didn't move at all, no voltage sag, and it did 40,000 RPM. Now, if you're doing that with a 6S motor and you want to do the equivalent, then that's roughly a 1600 kV. You would do 1600 times 25.2 volts, which is a fully charged 6S battery, and that roughly equals 39,000, 40,000. So I wanted a little bit more power, so I went to a 1700 kV motor, which is equivalent to about 43,000 RPM. So you're getting a little bit more top end, a little bit more power, but it seemed, I tried 1600, I tried 1700, I tried 1800, all of these kVs had their gives and takes, but it seemed like 1600 and 1700 got the same amount of flight time. I just had more power on 1700. And with the new fatter cameras, it was definitely conducive for me to have that little bit of extra power. So when I'm flying a 6 on there, a HERO6, I'm pushing it up into like the 660 gram, 656 I think is the exact weight. I'll throw it on the scale real quick so you can see. So this is a 6S quad with a HERO6 on it. That's pushing upwards of 556.7 grams. And that thing doesn't even feel like there's a camera on it because you do have that much more power. You still get double the flight time. I'm getting 3.5 minutes with a HERO6 on there. I'm able to do whatever I need to do, and I'm never feeling like I'm lacking in power, and it never comes down hot or anything. So that is extremely, important when you're talking about this is the only camera that we're going to be able to use in the future. And having that extra power definitely makes things a lot easier to deal with. Okay, so we're done talking about all of that action. Let's talk about some new Ethix products that have come out. I just kind of want to share some stuff with you because, I really like what I'm doing. I love the fact that I'm just trying to make stuff that's cool. I have fun doing this stuff. I like making cool stuff that makes my life easier, and hopefully it makes your life easier. These patches aren't going to make your life easier, but they are cool. We have these new patches. They're only available at our Ethix Ltd.com US distributor, which is Newbie Drones, based in San Diego, California. The other cool thing is this, which is a tempered glass screen protector that goes on the Taranis. We do have them available for the Q7X as well. It's extremely high quality tempered glass. It peels on and off multiple times. Even if you don't get it right the first time, you can peel it off. It's not going to damage it or anything. Super high quality. They're sold as well. Again, only at, or actually they'll be both. You can get them at ethixltd.com. They'll be available in China, which is at TBS warehouse, and then they'll also be available in San Diego, which is our US kind of distributor, and they're again Newbie Drone. The other thing is we have these, which are the Gowie straps. Again, these straps, everyone tries to find these straps. We found them from Gowie and had them made specifically so that they're easier to find. And why I particularly like this strap is because of the material that's on the back. It's not that stupid silicone that's like stitched on. It's not a very heavy strap. All of these things have problems. This particular strap, it does have, over time, they last very long compared to other straps, but the material that's on here, you heat it up, I put my finger on there for a couple seconds, and it just sticks. So, if you put especially on the GoPro rubber, you literally put this thing on GoPro rubber, let it heat up for a second, like it's just, sticking on there, and it sticks almost like glue, and you're not going to eject a GoPro unless the GoPro strap breaks, So, these are my favorite straps. They are available, again, at the store. And then one last thing, I just want to put this on the scale. People don't really know what this thing is, but I'm going to put it on the scale, kind of give you just a rundown. 8.8 grams. I'll just do this real quick. This is a prototype, so it's a little softer than it's going to be in the end, but protection for the lens of a HERO6. Come on, guys. No one's protecting the lens. That's the spot that hits the ground. This thing is literally coming down like that and going... Every HERO6 mount I've ever seen doesn't protect the lens. I'm sure there's one out there that does, but all of the mainstream ones don't, and it's extremely pertinent that you do protect the top of this lens. So this is like a mask that goes on there, and we have these coming out very soon. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, I enjoy doing these kinds of videos where I get to talk and kind of share the knowledge that I've accumulated over the years, the last 4 years, especially being able to do this stuff every single day is only because of you guys. So if you like this type of video, you like hearing me talk about this stuff, in particular. Please give me a thumbs up if you haven't already. Subscribe, and I appreciate everything, and I hope you learned something today. Thank you guys very much. Have a great evening, day / morning, whatever you need to do, breakfast, dinner, lunch. Bye.